What I would say to somebody who feels like they're trying to discover their calling is don't overcomplicate it. God wants you to live in a relationship with Him. He wants to live this day in this life with me. And by living His life with me and having a relationship to me, that's gonna pour out and He's gonna have ministry through me. For me, it always starts with a personal relationship with Jesus. My mom was everything to me and my older brother. She did without, she didn't date people, she had zero extracurricular activities. She worked 10 to 12 hours a day and she provided for me and Blake because that was the only way to run it. I think I was, about 9 or 10, I start hearing Mom going to these hospital trips, these doctor's visits. She's not doing great. Man, we're talking about this same word a lot. This cancer idea. So we would make visits to this hospital and finally the doctors, we go in after this big operation. The night before we were about to go in, me and my mom and my brother were sitting on my mom's bed and we were just so excited about all the things we were gonna do as a family from that point because the medicine she was taking limited us a lot. And so we get into the doctor's office the next day and the doctors come in and she's like, "What's the news?" And they were like, "Mrs. Todd, it's really not good. Not only is the cancer still where we try to remove it from, but it's throughout your whole body." She goes, "Well, what's next? What's next?" And they said, "Next is being as comfortable as you possibly can for as long as you possibly can. And maybe that's 2 years." And we go to a restaurant after, and we're sitting there silent. That was the first moment I can ever remember feeling like I have no idea what next looks like. Meanwhile, while we were in Virginia, we had an aunt and uncle and 4 little cousins in San Diego in Southern California. They had just bought a house to prepare for what could happen. And we're waiting for her to tell us what's next because we have no idea. And she goes, "We're gonna go home, we're gonna pack, we're gonna tell all our friends and family that we're moving to California and ask them to help us." Within a month, we were living in San Diego. And we went from Mom feeling like, the center of our universe to her and me and my brother living in this house. They knew something we didn't yet, is that our mom was gonna die and that they were gonna go from cool aunt and uncle to mom and dad. And so they said, "Melody, what's your take on all this?" And she goes, "All I can think is I live in California and my kids have the best people to look out for them." I remember watching this and I'm like, that's really what you think? Is you're that joyous that God's got us like this. She knew she wasn't gonna be able to look out for us in a few months and she knew God was gonna do it. And so when she passed, honestly, being there when she passed, I was holding her hand when the heart rate monitor stopped rating her heart. And I just remember in that moment knowing it's actually happening, that bad things really can happen, that your life really can feel like it's falling apart. Honestly, it was Poppy that said it in Mom's funeral. He was preaching the funeral and he looked right down at me and Blake and he goes, "You can't let this make you bitter. Everything that happens in your life is either gonna make you bitter or make you better. Something happens to you and you sulk, you're bitter. Something happens to you and you surrender it to God, you're better." Like, that's how it works. I was sitting in this high school ministry that my aunt and uncle made me go to. I didn't want to go to church. I didn't want to go to youth group. And I'm sitting in there and I'm listening to this message of the gospel and I realized this is what I needed. Not because I didn't have my mom anymore, but because that's the joy that she had. That's why she was so grateful and joyous. She knew when she died, she was going to be with the Lord. I knew so much about the Bible, and I did not know Jesus for a long time. Frankly, even when I thought I did. And so for me, it was my senior year, very beginning of my senior year in high school, when I really submitted my life to the Lord. And it was, "God, whatever you want, I'll do it." As my youth pastor would teach me the Bible, I'm watching going, this makes sense. I want to help this make sense for other people. And that was all I had. And so from there, I had told my uncle, I said, hey, I think I'm called to be a pastor. He goes, well, if you're called to be a pastor and if you're called to preach, you need to start working on that. And so I was on campus at North Greenville University. We hear that they had a 4-year Bible degree just right out of high school. And I thought, well, what my uncle said was, if God calls you to something, you need to move forward in obedience. And I know God's calling me to this, and this is a way that I can move forward in obedience. And so for those 4 years, I was, studying and learning to be a pastor and working under people and being discipled. I started this internship under this guy named Brian Spearman. He goes, you want to learn how to teach kids about Jesus? And I said, yeah. He goes, you want to learn how to write a message? I said, well, I'm learning in school. He goes, yeah, but you got to do it. He didn't just want to talk about it. He wanted to do what the Bible said. I was like, I love this. I love youth ministry. I love helping young people understand God's call in their life, and I love helping them follow it. And then I thought, well, how can I help them follow it more specifically? During my senior year of college, I started applying for different jobs as a youth pastor, because just by saying yes to whatever was next, that was for me what God did in showing me what He wanted me to do specifically. For me, it's always been, what is the next right thing? My wife and I found this church just outside of DC called Burke Community Church. And I had a boss there who, he knew that I was used to doing ministry. He goes, everything you go into, when you interact with somebody, if you want them to walk away understanding the gospel, you really have to be intentional. Jesus was all about people. Jesus stopped for people. Jesus went out of his way to talk to people. From there, I moved actually back. I was able to be close with my family in San Diego. I go over this course of 10 years from sitting in a seat in high school, not knowing Jesus or knowing what was next, to standing on the stage at that same high school ministry, teaching all these kids about who Jesus is and what his plan is in their life. Personally, I feel like people overcomplicate this whole call to ministry thing. It's not generally as specific as we think about it. For me, it was, I knew God called me to have a relationship with Him, and so it was surrendering my life to Him. Well, what's next? And then it was always the next step. And so it's funny, it began so broad, and then it got into this really specific thing where right now I can say I'm so passionate about discipling high school students, but it started off with, I want to do what God wants me to do. I feel like it's been so simple, not easy, but simple, because it's just, if He lights up that path, you take that step. When I was in high school, starting this obedience relationship with Jesus, I had no idea where that was going. And I still have the rest of my life where I don't know what next is, but I know in this moment, I'm gonna obey what God's put on my plate.